From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
And hello again. Welcome to yet another edition of Chicago Newsroom. This is the, oh my God, it's been 1 year of Rahm Emanuel special edition. Although, of course, I think, as some wags have said, Rahm Emanuel's first year won't really end until about 9 o'clock Tuesday morning, when we can really assess what his first year has been like after the NATO protesters are all getting on the L to go to O'Hare or something. So if you'll indulge your host for just a moment, we didn't invite Rahm Emanuel to be on the show with us today because he's busy. So if you'll excuse a little impersonation, I thought this is what Rahm Emanuel would say if we had him sitting at the table here today. Look, 3 things. 1, we had a lost decade with disinvestment, the parking meter deal, short-term thinking. 2, we're rebuilding infrastructure, bringing in new jobs, new corporate headquarters. Everything's transparent now. Technology, retrofitting inefficient buildings, protecting our children. I defy anyone to say that there's been any more investment in Chicago any time in history than there is right now. And 3, longer school day. 3, longer school day. And I got 2 other things too, but I can't tell you about them. Wink.
That was great, except for the fact that you had all of your fingers.
I know, it's like
weren't missing half the leg.
It would be, and 3, oh, no, come on, now let's not make too much fun of the mayor. And so we got a longer school day and new work rules, and we can't stand still. Did I mention that I used to work at the White House? I gotta go. Thank you, Mayor Emanuel. Andy Shaw joins us today from...
That was great. What's left to say?
Andy Shaw joins us today from the Better Government Association, a journalist, former journalist and now still journalist, because one of the things I really want to talk about today is the fact that you guys are really morphing that organization into a kind of a news shop, and I'm very proud of what you're doing over there. And
the watchdogging is what we do in the news business and what we do at the BGA, so It's not that different. We just are doing it in a nonprofit costume as opposed to a for-profit
and making less
costume.
money at it. Yeah. Kristen Mack joins us too from the Chicago Tribune. First time on the program, and I'm so glad to have you here. Kristen Mack is, her name is like always on the front page of the Tribune because she follows Rahm Emanuel. And actually, you were one of those folks who were out there in the frigid L stops following him around when he was just a candidate trying to prove that he was actually a Chicagoan, right?
Indeed. I remember spending several hours in the basement of a county building during residency hearings as he sat there for 12 hours and proved that he was in fact a Chicagoan. So I've been there from the beginning.
So you and he have some special bond. He's seen you around.
I don't know if he would characterize it that way, but yes.
And also Tim Jones joining us from Bloomberg News. Tim, it's great to have you on the show for the first time too.
Good to be here.
Bloomberg, of course, following the mayor. I think it's fair to say with more of a financial spin on things, and so that's why we kind of wanted to have you on the show here today too, because. As you've kind of called him, he's the mayor part-time, but he's really the city's fundraiser in chief in a lot of ways.
It's a continuation of the campaign. I don't think the campaign has stopped since it started in, when was it, October of 2010?
September,
Yeah.
Do you think it's going to stop ever?
No, I don't. I think he's in perpetual campaign mode. He's selling himself, he's selling the city, he's selling its attributes, he's instinctively impatient, and call him a man in motion.
But Tim, nothing's really changed. A late board member, John White, who spent almost 50 years on the BGA board, tells a story of living out in Park Ridge, and this goes back 25 or 30 years. A young man rides up on a bicycle and basically says he's fundraising for Paul Simon in one of the late senator's early campaigns. Maybe this was a race for governor. And the young man knows that John White is a man of means and he's a Democrat, and so he asks if he'll help the campaign, and John White goes in the house and comes out, and he has a check for $50, and the young man looks at him and says, I'd like you to add another zero, we wanted 500. Well, the man on the bicycle, who lived in Wilmette at the time and was still a college student, is one Rahm Emanuel. So he's been fundraising his entire adult life wherever he's been, and I gotta say, as someone who has to fundraise for a nonprofit, he is as good as they get at that particular skill.
Bill Clinton called him a genius at raising money, and now he's put to the ultimate test.
And remember, he raised money for the first Mayor Daley campaign in '89, and he's been raising it ever since for Clinton, Obama, and in that interregnum between public sector jobs, he did a pretty good job of raising bucks for his own family with a couple of transactions that made him a multi-millionaire for life.
Kristen, you have a good perspective because you saw Daley, and now you're seeing Rahm, and it's quite a contrast from an executive to basically a legislator.
Right, and I was going to say he now gets people to add more zeros to those checks, and he'll tell them. If people offer $5,000, he will say, no, you can do better than that, and rip it up or tell them to start over. So, I mean, he's an inveterate arm twister, campaign fundraiser, although he likes to sort of shy away from that role that he played so many years ago to say that he's more than that. He's also into policy and clearly politics.
And Ken, you apologized for not doing NATO today, but doing it next week. But NATO's perfect next week. NATO is the period at the end of that long paragraph about Rahm's first year. Yeah. And I think it epitomizes perfectly everything that the first year represented. It's bold and it's brash. It's got great potential and a lot of potential peril. And that's true of a lot of the things he's done.
Kind of a high wire.
He's a man in a hurry, thinks outside the box, will embrace any idea if it looks like it's got potential, frequently too quickly without enough vetting or not enough accountability or oversight. But all the ideas have potential. And it's, I think, as someone who's watched politicians my entire adult life, I do find it exciting to see someone who is in the middle of the idea flow 24/7. And I know Kristen covers that and I don't anymore. But this is a guy in a hurry to get everything done simultaneously. Yeah. He's in too much of a hurry, but the goal is noble because the city needs so much. The challenges are daunting and you really can't dally too long.
Well, Kristen, you kind of made the point in your very fine summary the other day that yeah, he's mayor, but that's kind of a side job. I mean, his real job is he's his own press secretary, he's his own chief of staff, and he's his own fundraiser and everything else. And as such, he has just a brutal drive to sell the, I don't know what you call it, but the accomplishment list. I mean, put the easel up there, and I don't think I've ever seen anybody who is as much of a self-salesman, maybe Donald Trump, but I mean, besides that, the guy just never stops telling you how good he is.
Right, and one of the things that I think is interesting is we're doing all of this talking and writing stories and covering his first year, but he chose for the first time not to do that. He had a 30-day press conference with that poster board behind him, and before he even got to the 100th day, he had that poster board behind him as well to talk about his accomplishments. And now he's sort of letting us do it for him. and he had a press conference yesterday, but what he did was he announced that there was going to be a new building built, a new high-rise built in the West Loop. And one of the things that he said is that confidence is the best thing that that confidence is free. And he feels like he's given Chicago its swagger back, its confidence back. And I think that that's sort of the way that that he functions and operates.
But Kristen, he also did his own self-analysis. They did release their own sense of the first year.
And 32 pages.
And laid out what they believed to be promises kept. Some of the promises weren't kept, but I think he really did not feel that the best way to reflect on the first year was by doing hand-to-hand combat with the press corps. I think it was probably better to let us do this rather than to engage in a series of interviews that would be pretty combative. Well, you haven't gotten that far with school reform. The homicide rate went up 52%. Right. We're still in the middle. There'd be 5 or 10 things that he would be beaten up about that would obscure the accomplishments. It's almost easier to let us pontificate.
I mean, the hard stuff is coming because this is an extended honeymoon. The budget was approved 50-0. There's not much of a squawk from City Council.
And the weather's been very good too. He's even managed that.
It was a remarkable, yes, he did a great job with the winter.
He did a great job with the winter.
So he can pull that off again. But there's pension matters that it's a huge, crushing, unfunded liability hanging over the city. He's not going to get any help from the state, and this is a city that is largely at the mercy of the economy. Chicago lost more population than any other city in the top 10 in the past decade. And there are challenges coming, a possibility of a school strike in the fall. So I think it's not that he's being put to the test now, but I think he's really going to be put to the test.
And he did a great job. I pointed this out a few times. He did a great job with the low-hanging fruit.
Yes.
He is a master of stagecraft and optics. Look at his resume. He has succeeded in all of these different venues with Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. By success, I mean he's gotten things done. You may not have liked what he got done, but he accomplished a lot with Clinton, with Obama. He helped the Democrats reclaim the House in '06. He was a successful investment banker for a couple of years, great fundraiser for Daley. And so he really knows the game, but you're absolutely right. How do you turn the Titanic, which is the school system, around? How do you deal with gangs and drugs and guns and neighborhoods and generational poverty? I mean, and as you say, you're going to bring all these manufacturing jobs back. He's doing a pretty good job on that front, but these are such daunting challenges. No amount of stagecraft is going to basically turn those institutions around.
This is not turning around the U.S. House in 2006.
Right.
And 4 years later, it was all gone. It was wiped out. This is fundamental. It is structural, and it is very, very difficult.
We've observed on this show, and I bring this up frequently just so that new viewers might not know this, but I used to work for Mayor Daley in his press office, so it's important to point that out. And I have a kind of a skilled eye and ear for spin, especially when it's mayoral spin. And I am just stunned at the ability that Rahm Emanuel has to re-announce things and make them look fresh.
Well, Daley did
and
the
new.
same thing. He recycled the same news conference year after year. Kristen knows that. I would cover housing, homeless, schools, I mean, it's the same grouping. All you do is add a new top with one little twist of change.
You pre-announce, you announce, and then you re-announce.
But if you look at the polls that we've seen lately, I think Chicagoans are pretty sophisticated.
Yeah.
And yes, it's been a year of spin, but I think the polling, while he is generally getting favorable marks, they're not anywhere near as high as you might think if you relied simply on the press clippings.
Right.
I think there's a lot of cynicism. People understand that no amount of energy and pizzazz is going to basically solve these intractable problems.
Where I wanted to go was in agreement with Tim that the first year, a lot of what has been put in the accomplishment column has been essentially re-announcing a lot of things that Daley had already done, frankly, and a lot of, but give the man credit, he's skillful at that. But what's coming up next hasn't even yet been pre-announced. This is new stuff. When you start talking about coming up with a CTU, CTU and CTA and the firefighters, nobody even talks about what's going to happen when they get serious with the firefighters. This stuff is real.
And this is a city that is divided into thirds: 1/3 white, 1/3 black, and 1/3 Hispanic. And I was interested in the Tribune poll that came out this week that showed Emanuel gets very high marks among whites and people with substantial income, but it's south of 50% with regard to blacks and to Hispanics.
Right.
And going into the next couple of years, it will be interesting to see what that means in terms of how City Council responds, what sort of community support the mayor receives when they get down to tough issues.
And
like
Tim, that
schools.
underscores something that I've noticed about the first year. And if I were to give him one piece of advice, I would say spend more time on Main Street and less time on Wall Street. In other words, I think there's a perception out there, because he's such a good fundraiser, and in the Willie Sutton model, you have to go where the money is, and the money is in the deep pockets, and I have to go to those same sort of places for the BGA. But my point is, I think there's a perception that he really only talks to and listens to the elite and the most wealthy in Chicago, and doesn't spend enough time out with the community groups and the churches. And I think that's why those numbers, I mean, he is not a man of 47th Street. He's much more a man of Astor Place. And I think that's something he has to work on.
He didn't come up within the organization.
Right. Yeah. And he, he's been called Mayor 1% by a lot of people who are against his policies. But I think when you look at what he's tried to tackle over this last year, the one thing that no matter how many different strategies or how many different approaches that they've tried is that violent crime is still up in the city.
Absolutely right.
And when you have homicides and shootings that continue to increase, even as the mayor's office tries to spin it under the vein of, well, look, overall crime is down. When you have violent crime, which largely happens on the south side and on the west side, that's something that you can't really put a good face on.
There just is no way to write a press release about that.
Right.
And when the kids are failing in the schools and it looks like you're beating up the teachers, you're going to get a lot of pushback from those communities. A lot of the inner city school communities, those parents think that they're basically being sold out for more charter schools that their kids are going to have a hard time getting into. And so the feeling is that it's not about protecting them and their families, it's about creating a new class of schools that will help a few kids. And so I think some of the strategies, while you have to try things, I don't think that they're particularly well received in communities that feel like over the years they've been ignored anyway.
One thing that I think is interesting about education, though, is that, and choosing that as an issue to pursue, there's widespread agreement that kids benefit from spending more time in school. Our polls showed that, and it's just sort of.
I was surprised by that, I must say. Yeah.
But what was interesting about what the Tribune poll showed was that people believe teachers should get paid more if they are spending time in the classroom. And so I think as Rahm continues to pursue that's going to be an interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out and whether he finds the extra money to help pay teachers.
And Andy raised a good point about this corporate identification, and it creates some separation. I think on the corporate side, we saw some blowback a couple of months ago on the infrastructure trust thing, because City Council said, wait a minute. We want more details on how this is coming down. And I think that's a potential pitfall for this administration, because it is very tight with the financial community, but these things cannot be done entirely behind closed doors, including negotiated bond deals.
And let me say something about transparency, because I wrote this in a story for Cranes, and we're probably going to do something more on it.
No, transparency's been handled.
Well, the data, and you said that in the beginning, Mr. Mayor, the data dump has been impressive in the sense that we now have access to infinitely more information about salaries and benefits and contracts. That's all fine. But transparency is a lot more than a data dump. It's about the process by which decisions are made. Who do you talk to?
Absolutely.
When do you talk to them? And how do you get from point A to point B? And I don't think, I for one don't have much idea of how that gets done, and I think I know Mr. Emanuel pretty well. So I think behind each of the claims there is more work to be done, and in the areas of schools and crime and economic development, it's not a little bit more, it's mountains of work to do.
But I think he's shown us that he has no intention of allowing us to see how he governs, how decisions evolve, how they
You've been
get
fighting
there.
at the Tribune
right.
over that, I know.
Everything that we filed, they've said, well, that's pre-decisional.
Yeah.
So the lawyers have ruled that until the final product is done, then they don't have to share that information. And so
emails are like voicemails,
right,
or whatever that argument was.
And so even the things that we have received from the mayor's office are the press releases that we already get in response. The things we received in response to our FOIA requests are the press releases.
But I'm sympathetic to their argument to this extent. If everything is available to us, then people are going to be afraid to be bold and creative in their thought process, because if something seems a little nutsy and you want to propose it because it's worth considering, and then it becomes a front page story in the newspaper or on the 10 o'clock news, somebody looks like an idiot. I think you want to encourage the free flow of ideas. So I don't disagree that some of the process, but I just think there's a way that you can maintain the open dialogue internally and also share with us more about how decisions are made. I mean, I just think that they haven't looked for common ground, and I think that's an area that I think there is a way of doing it without having to release everything, and they have not looked for that way yet.
You know, I got to tell you, this is almost sort of more of a personal comment than anything, but I'm a little bit surprised at how positive you are being today, Andy. I thought that the Better Government Association would be way more offended by some of this lack of transparency and some of the infrastructure trust kind of things.
Oh,
but
we were all over him for that.
I know. But I find you more positive than I thought you might have been.
But I think the same assessment applies to virtually everything. that you welcome ideas that come out into the marketplace of thinking, and he's great with that, and you try to produce as much data as you can. And I think the same problem, in too much of a hurry, not concerned enough about oversight and accountability, and a little bit impulsive with certain ideas. I think that applies to the infrastructure trust. I think it applied to the red light cameras. It applied to the longer school day. If you look, you basically, I think what's really been enjoyable about this year is you've seen the Rahm Emanuel personality that's been discussed so thoroughly in so many venues play out day to day in front of you as your mayor, and there really aren't any surprises. He admits to being in a big hurry, and being in a hurry to solve problems isn't a bad idea. But when you rush the solutions through, that's the problem. And I'll say candidly, too much of a hurry, not enough vetting. And I don't know if that's all that nice, but I'm not going to beat him up for the effort. I admire the focus, I admire the energy, I admire the creativity, and I've got to say in all candor that I can't imagine that there are too many people out there that were better prepared for a job like this at this time, which is not to say that the problems are easily solved and that he's any more likely to solve them because they're so intractable.
But it's been a most fortunate year for the administration. No scandals, no huge blow-ups. Yes, the murder rate went up, but there was nothing of terribly high visibility. The weather, as you pointed out, was nothing, and that will happen. It always does in any mayoral administration. But they've navigated well in the first year, but they've had almost excellent conditions in which to do that.
There are so many of these contradictions, and Kristen, I pulled a quote from your thing that I thought was so good. Where this is Kristen Mack writing. He pledged to stem a chronic financial crisis without tax hikes, then unleashed a menu of new and increased fines and fees so broad that Chicago is more expensive for most. He vowed an end to insider politics, yet he gave the hard sell to controversial speed camera programs that would benefit his one-time campaign manager. And he is a self-proclaimed champion of transparency, who's proven to be secretive. So there is that contradiction that we all live with, but there is something, and I know we deal with this all the time here. There's something kind of exhilarating about it, because I think it is fair to say that Mayor Daley just kind of like wound down in the last few years, and it got really cold and annoying, and this is so refreshing by contrast.
Right. And one of the things I'd like to say is that he has infused City Hall with a double dose of Red Bull. Like, that is the kind of energy that he has brought to the city, and that is good. I think that people feel that and get the sense that the city is on the move. And again, when Rahm focuses on I think he focuses as much on the impression of what he's done in his first year as what he's actually accomplished. And part of that in his media control and messaging is making sure every day they've got something to feed the press, that they've got something to give us to write about, so that we don't spend as much time investigating the infrastructure trust because we've got to move to the next thing that he's introduced.
Daley had a lot of years of that, and
he sure did.
Having covered him the whole time, I think that collectively, we in the media dropped the ball for a lot of those years because we were sold initially on this idea that Daley, the second Daley, wasn't like the first Daley. He was the wonky technocrat. He was going to tackle schools, housing, homelessness, neighborhoods, and he wasn't really doing the politics. Meanwhile, all of the first Daley's henchmen had moved into City Hall and installed the same political apparatus that the old man had, and were running it in that corrupt, fixed way that ended up sending some folks to jail. And so, but for a lot of years, I think we kind of bought this myth of a different Daley.
Oh yeah.
Hired truck changed that, and that you can kind of divide the Daley years. And post-hired truck, I think there was a decline, and Eric Zorn, Kristen's colleague, wrote a pretty good column this week in which he looked at the 10 things Daley left us in the last few years.
10 reasons we don't miss him.
Well, and that also create headaches for Rahm and the taxpayers. And so, to Rahm's credit, I think he has tried, at least in the first year, to rectify some of those wrongs that were left behind. And one thing he does that Daley never did when you disclose or when you reveal something that's going on, he moves quickly. When we revealed the abuse of credit cards in all those agencies, he ordered them torn up. When we revealed that his chief of staff, Teresa Mintel, had engineered a sweet pension deal for herself at the CTA, he ordered her to renounce that, although she hasn't yet officially. And so, to his credit, Daley would tend to shoot the messenger and ignore the message.
Yeah.
Rahm does tend to move more quickly when things are disclosed. But those have all been things that applied to the previous administration for the most part. Let's see what happens when they're basically at his own front door.
I do think that there's lists of things that we want to talk about, but one that is vague but kind of bothers me a little bit is how easily in the budgetary process they were willing to cut a couple of $1 million from the library, from health clinics, from frankly the most powerless parts of the entire administration, and then lavish the money on things like NATO and all that. And you have to kind of look at that and say, are we seeing the priorities here? Can we see where his priorities are?
Well, and I think that you get that sense, or you got that sense during the budget, and that was one of the things that aldermen fought back against. Even though a lot of people, Rahm's friends, don't use the libraries and the public library system, don't rely on public mental health clinics, those are services that the city has long provided that stand for more than just a place to go do research. Those are places where kids go after school and wait for their parents who are working. And I think that
safe zones.
Right, and so he got that pushback from aldermen and ended up changing some of his original proposals. But the way that he got unanimity on his budget vote was by making changes along the margins, just enough concessions to get the aldermen to buy into his proposals and what it is that he wanted to do.
And that gets back to is this city being redefined? And the support that he has is from whites and from upper income people. Is that what the future of Chicago is? And can the city continue, or can the city reverse the losses that it suffered population-wise in the past decade?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of concern in that original budget. I for one thought that he would use some of the TIF money that's been sitting in a reserve fund rather than go after libraries and health clinics. That seemed a little cold and cynical. I think the other pattern we've seen is shoot for the moon with your idea and then ratchet it back a little bit when there's criticism, and look like you're flexible, but essentially get 90% of what you wanted, which has happened over and over and over. A little bit of retrenchment in the face of criticism, but then a rubber stamp council again.
And on that rubber stamp note, we have to wrap it up. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation here today, and let's come back in a year and do it again or something. Before we do go, though, I do want to mention that Sunday the 27th is going to be NATO Day here on CAN TV. We've got people out shooting all kinds of things all this weekend, all the speeches and rallies and stuff, and they're going to edit that furiously together, and then from 9 to 5 on CAN TV 21 next Sunday is going to be the whole thing be rebroadcast. It'll be really worth watching. I hope you'll do it. So, Andy, Kristen, Tim, thank you so much for being on the show here today. I loved it, and we'll do it again sometime. Thanks so much. You have been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a community service of CAN TV. Of course, you can find us here on cable, but you can also see this online right here. Just go to this address any old time, and you can watch the show again. You can also check us out on iTunes as an audio podcast that you can go to the rallies and be listening to us while you're protesting. I don't know. Hey, we'll see you back here next week. Thanks very much for watching. And see you next week on CAN TV.